Hello everyone, I am Archana Rani. In this video lecture, I am going to cover the topic Introduction to Requirement Engineering for the course Software Engineering and Project Management. The learning objective and outcome of this lecture is objective to study the fundamental concept of requirement engineering, and the expected outcome is student will able to use the fundamental concept of requirement engineering to any real life problem. The agenda for today's lecture is we are going to discuss the topic what is requirement, what is engineering, what is requirement engineering, why it is important, what is the purpose of the software engineering, what are the levels and types of requirement, characteristics of requirement, and conclusion. It is the second unit of the subject software engineering and project management titled requirement engineering and analysis. Let's we start to discuss more about the concepts requirement engineering. For better understanding of the requirement engineering concept, first you should know, or everybody should know, what is requirement, then what is engineering, then we can discuss what is requirement engineering together. So as per the IEEE standard, what is requirement? A requirement is a condition or the capability that must be met or propose a system or the system component that satisfy the conditions, standards, specifications, or other formally imposed document. That means the everybody should know the more details about the system that help to meet the requirements of the customers, and while meeting that requirements uh, it should satisfy the standards or the specifications of the particular systems, and that what are the constraints we required, what are the capability that we can incorporate in that system that we have to focus on it. That is what to identify the requirement. In simple word, this is the IEEE definition for the requirement. Whereas, if we want to define the requirement in simple words, then we may call that the requirement is nothing but what user are expected from the system. That is what user wants or what is the need of the users. Now here user is nothing but the stakeholder. So we have to identify the system requirements by what he or she is exactly expected from the system or need of the all stakeholders that identify. Then the system requirement should specify what is that requirement exactly and how that requirement is going to act on it. That should be easily understandable by all the stakeholders. That is, it is a range from the high level abstract statements of a service or the system constraint to a detailed mathematical functional specifications. As I already said, that system requirement, for identifying the system requirement thoroughly, we should concentrate on what is the stakeholders expectations, and for meeting that expectations, as we have seen in the definition, that we have to meet that expectations. For meeting that expectations, we have to provide the service, yes, through the systems. And for providing that service, we may take it the help that whatever conditions or the constraints they want to incorporate in system, that can be easily implement in the system. And for that, we may take it the help from some mathematical functional specifications. That is what the requirement. Whereas let's we discuss what is engineering. For engineering term, engineering is very general sense of the term, that we try to do the things according to the particular flow, or the particular flow or the structure is already defined, and as per that structure we have to follow it. That is what the engineering says. That is nothing but it's try to follow some certain good practice for implementing that particular systems, or the guidelines have been provided, and according to that guideline we have to implement the systems, or with the help of some frameworks or some rules has been set, it rules and responsibility has been already stated, that we have to consider and implement it. uh, or we can see that engineering is a by using the engineering concept we can develop some best practices over the experiences and implement the system. That is what the engineering concept. Now we have already covered that what is the requirement. Yes, requirement is nothing but the stakeholders, what stakeholders wants or what is the need of it, then how we can do it, what we have to do it and how we can do it, that we have to focus. And for performing that how and what and how we may use it, some good practices which we have already get it some experience through the engineering concept. That is what the some guidelines, or by following some framework we can perform or we can implement the system. That is what the requirement engineering. Hope you understood the concept, students. Now if I want to say the bookish definition for the requirement engineering, um, in short, I may say that the requirement engineering is nothing but what are the activities we want to perform in the system, that we have to first identify it. That activity should be easily communicate with the stakeholders, or the purpose of the using the system. That is what are the context of this system we are going to use it in the system, that we have to identify it. That is what the requirement engineering. So the bookish definition is, it is a sub-discipline of software engineering that is concerned with determining the goals, functions and constraints of the software system. So while focusing on the requirement engineering concept, first we should know what are the goals of that system, what are the functionalities the users is expected from it, and for achieving the goals or implementing the functionality, what are the different constraints that stakeholders want to incorporate in the system, that we have to identify it. That is what that we have to all the things we have to elaborate it in at one place. That is called as the requirement engineering. Means it is a process of eliciting the stakeholders needs and desire, and then develop into the agree upon the set of details requirement that can serve as a basis for all the subsequent development activities. That is called as the requirement engineering. Or we may call it is a process of establishing the service that the customers require from the systems and the constraints under which it operate, and then developed it, as I initially said it. Or requirement themselves is the descriptions of the system services and the constraints that generated during the requirement engineering process. For this is all about the definition of the requirement engineering. Now for meeting these requirements engineering concept, we have to follow the specific process or the steps. What is that requirement engineering process, that we will discuss in a next lecture. But time being, you should know that to implement all these definitions or whatever things is defined in the definition for the requirement engineering, to meet that we have to follow the specific process. That is what the requirement engineering process. Okay students, hope you understood the concept of requirement engineering. Now let's we discuss what is the purpose of requirement engineering. For discussing about the purpose of the requirement engineering, very simple purpose is there, that to make the problem that is being stated clear and complete. Whatever problem, as I have initially said it, the expected outcome for this lecture, that you should able to implement this concept. For when the students or the people may be able to implement the concept, if they are knowing the thoroughly knowledge about that topic, then only it is possible. For this, we should know the details about our problem definition first, and for understanding the problem definition statement, that statement should be clearly defined first things, and second thing, that statement should be a complete, then only we can easily identify what that stakeholders are expected or want, or what is the need of that stakeholders. And to ensure the solutions for that, whatever solutions we are providing for the particular problem, that solution should be correct, should be reasonable and effective. That's why we should concentrate on the requirement engineering concept, which can verify that the whatever solutions we are using for the particular problem, that are be that can be checked, yes, or verified it. That is the purpose of the requirement engineering. Now, why it is important? It is important, as we had already discussed, the main task of the requirement is to ensure that the things should be understood by all the stakeholder. What the stakeholder exactly wants, or what is the need of the stakeholders, we should understood that properly. Then only we are able to implement the system. If there is a lacking between the understanding of the requirement, then the whole process may be collapsed because of the, maybe the reasons may be misunderstanding or lacking of knowledge. That's why the importance for the requirement engineering take place here while developing the effective software, which will help to reduce the software errors at the early stage of the development of software. That's why to identify the requirement engineering concept is very, very important. Okay, hope you understood the purpose and the importance. Let's we understand the requirement details about the some picture story. As the story is how the customers explain its or her problem definition. The second steps may be how that project leader is understood that problem definition. Third may be how that the people have been analyzed that problem definition. Next one is how the programmer has written the program for that proposed problem definition. How that business consultant is expected from the system, and how that project has been documented exactly. Whereas what the operations are installed on the system at the client place or the stakeholder place, whereas what is the customers have been claimed for you, the expected outcome, and what is supposed to perform that task, how it was supported by it, and lastly what is exact the need of the customers. And there is a tremendous lacking between the customers explanations and understanding, or the customers expected needs, and the understanding by the different peoples for that problem definition. That's why the understanding the requirement of the customers or the stakeholders, what he or she exactly want, is very important. Yes, that's why to understand the requirement engineering concept is it is very important in a software engineering. Okay, this is all about the introduction of the requirement, how the engineering concept will take place in a software development process, and what is exactly the requirement engineering. Let's we discuss what are the levels and the types of the requirement. For levels and the types of the requirement, we get it the three types of the level here. First one is the business level, second one is user level, and third one is product level. For business level, it is a topmost level, whereas only we are concentrating on the business requirement as per the business point of view, as we have seen in a pictorial diagram, that how the business consultant has described your system. Yes, whereas that is what the business requirement. Whereas the second category is user level. For user level, you will get it the requirement types as users requirement. Users requirement may have the classification, further classifications, that is functional requirement and the non-functional requirement. Whereas the users level may have the business rule, its business rules or the quality attributes. By using that quality attributes, we can define what the users, we can define the some streamlines to the requirements for the quality of the product. Okay, whereas the next category is the product level. For product level, The types and the types of the requirements are may concentrate on what are the different types of the constraints we want to incorporate in a systems, or the data requirement. Based on the data requirements, we can give it some constraints on the data. Yes, as I said it, that for the users requirement is classified into two types: functional requirement. Functional requirement is based on the functional specifications. Similarly, it's a non-functional requirement. Non-functional requirement is again based on the requirement specification. So how the understand the requirements is important. Similarly, it is again very much important that the what are your requirement specifications you have understood, or your stakeholder have conveyed to you, that should be appropriately placed at one place. That is called as the specific requirement specification documents, that we are going to cover in a further lecture. Okay, that is again important, that to concentrate on the specifications that can be stated at one place, called as the documented at one place. Yeah, some of the external interfaces is required for the requirement, that can be again communicate through the requirement specifications. So these are the hierarchy, or the types of the different categories of types of the requirement and level of the requirement. Hope you understood these things. Okay, students, as I said it, that the business requirement may have the number of features, and that features we can divide it into two category. First one is functional requirement, and second one is non-functional requirement. Let's we discuss more details about it. For understanding the business requirement, what is business requirement? Business requirement is nothing but the set the business persons have a objective, that high level of the objective of the organizations has been considered in a business requirement, or the customer request from the system or the product will come under the business requirement. Whereas the user requirement is described by the users, that what user exactly wants or need of that system. Whereas the functional requirement, as I said it, that what are the different functionality can be provided by the developer to the users, or to the stakeholder, that enable the user to accomplish their task, thereby satisfying the business requirement. That is what the business requirement. The next category for the requirement is non-functional requirement. For non-functional requirement, these types of the requirement can be focused on whatever functionality has been considered by the developer or built into the product. We have to find out, is that functionality is taking place at appropriate place or not. Whatever constraints is required, all that constraint has been taken care by or not. But while considering or while verifying these requirements, we have to concentrate on a time constraint. Either we can concentrate on the time constraint, or we can concentrate on a processing concept, or we can concentrate on a security purpose, or we can concentrate on a mm, effectiveness of that effectiveness of that particular constraints. Likewise, the topic or the constraints may come into the non-functional requirement. Okay, these are the description for the level of the requirement. More details are the relationship between the levels and the types of requirement. For relationship, we have to identify requirement. As I already said it, that requirement, it is a heart of the system. If you are lacking into the requirement, then whatever process, whatever things you have implemented in a system uh, maybe it will collapse all the things. So it is very important that in a early stage only you have to concentrate on the requirement. Okay, students, so let's we discuss the relationship between the requirements, and how that requirements is important in a particular software. So as I said it, that requirement is very important to identify the need of the system, then what are the features we are expected from the system. Yes, and once you understood, then it will help for the analysis and designing of the system as well as the implementation of the system or testing of the system. And the base of all the needs, features or the requirement is if we give it the concentration or focus on it. For better understanding of the problem solving technique, we can identify the particular problem, the solution for this the problem. First, you have to identify you have to understood the need of the system, understood the application domain of the system, understood the solution of the system. Yes, and this is based on the requirement only. That's why to getting the details about the requirement or the specifications of the stakeholder is very very important for each and every type of the problem. Yes, otherwise all the system may get collapse, that the analysis may get wrong, designing may get wrong, implementation get me wrong, and we may lose the number of we may lose the time period for whole the system. Let's we discuss the characteristics of the good requirement. For characteristics of good requirement, first characteristic we may consider that the unitary. That means the requirement is addresses one and only one thing at a time. That is a good thing. Or if we focus the requirement one by one. Second characteristics, that the requirement should be complete. For completing the requirement, it should be fully stated in one place with no missing information. That type of the requirement is called as the complete. Whereas the requirement should be have the characteristic as a consistent. That means that it should not be have the contradict or any other requirement, or fully consistent with all the authorizations with the external documentation, then we call as it's the consistency requirement. Then next characteristics is atomic. That requirement should be atomic, that if it's depend on one requirement is depend on other requirement, and if you perform that task, then it should be automatically affect everywhere. Next one is current. The requirement has not been made absolute by the passage of the time. Yes, unambiguous. The unambiguous information should not be provided to the stakeholder because it is consciously stated without the resources of the technical jargon. That is the unambiguous information. The information should be clearly specified it. Yes, the variable, the implementation of the requirement can be determined easily. It should not be vary from one place to another place. Yes, whenever we require we can easily get available and easily use it. That is what the feasible, that requirement can be implemented within the constraints of that problem definition easily. So these are the characteristics, good characteristics of the requirement, that is unitary, complete, constraint, atomic, current, unambiguous, variable and feasible. And to considering this all the requirements, good requirements, we should implement, or we should consider, or we should state it, whatever information we gathered from the stakeholder or the user, by implementing these characteristics, and we specify that at one place called as the SRS document. Okay, for this, first you should know the domain requirement problem. The domain requirement problem first is the understandability. For better understandability, the requirement should be expressed in a language of the application domain, that easy everybody can easily understood it. The application is written for mortgage banking. People need to express the functionality in term of the home loans, mortgage balance, excess, the investor accounting or the foreclosure, etc. Here the example is taken that whatever requirement is identified, that requirement should be represent in a simple language, in a simple word. it should be written at appropriate place in appropriate format, as if you are going for the banking problem. Then what type of the banking language in understand by that stakeholder, it should be represent in that language itself. Likewise, you should be use it the specific domain as per the problem and represent that requirement. This is often not understand by the software engineering and developing the system. Yeah, that is what the understandability, that the developer team should be again thoroughly know about that language, about that representation, then only he or she can be able to understand that requirement and implement that into the system. The second important point is the implicitness, that the domain specialize understand the area so well that they can do not think for making that domain requirement explicitly. Whatever things is required, that things can be implement implicitly in the system, that it should not be showing. For example, it's given that banking software, if you decided to develop the banking software, people should not be by observing that system or by using that system, the people should not be understand that the requirement has been explicitly defined. All that things should be implicitly considered and implicitly implement that rules and regulations of that domain. Yes, that is what, that it should be easily communicated from one stakeholder to another stakeholder, including the software development team itself. That is about the domain requirement problem, that for a particular domain, the developer team, the analysis team, the testing team should be having the knowledge about that domain. Then only whatever software we are going to develop, we will develop the quality software. Now let's we discuss what are the approaches of the requirement engineering. For requirement engineering approaches, it is actually the process that help to develop the real world problem into the digital world problem solution. That is called as the requirement engineering. And each approach have the specified thinking about the real world problem or followed the unique process to build that system specification as a solutions. What are that approaches, we will get it in a system. For requirement engineering has to think first for the feasibility study, then the requirement analysis, then the requirement definition, and then follow the documentations. And for performing this task, we will take it the help from these types of the approaches, we will get it for the requirement engineering. For that, first you should know this terminology. What is feasibility study? Feasibility study can perform in two way, that it will find out the current user's need as well as the tentative budget of that particular problem. Similarly, then once you identify its user's need and the budget estimate budget, then you go for the analysis. For analyzing, you have to think about the stakeholders requirements from the system, what that stakeholder are expected from the system, all has to consider into the analysis. Then you have to define that in form of the understandable representations, and then you go for the documentations, that is called as the SRS. It's include both the definition and the specifications of the system. Now, what are the different approach we get it for the requirement engineering? So these are the proposed approach. So many researchers have studied on this requirement engineering approaches, and they have elaborated that requirement engineering approaches like object oriented approach, service oriented approach, goal oriented approach. We may call that the incremental approach, reverse engineering approach, bio-inspired approach, or the traditional approach may be used it for while uh, collecting the informations from the stakeholders or the requirement gathering. Yes. And if we do some analysis based on these approaches, one of the researcher has actually represent this analysis in their paper, and that analysis I have considered here, I have taken here for better understanding of this concept for you. as we have proposed the different category of the approach, that is object oriented, service oriented, goal oriented, reverse engineering, or bio inspired, or traditional. And if you put it some parameters on it, like reusability concept, scaling concept, or the character, you may call the characteristics, or the integration of the system, or on conflictness, or the unambiguity of the systems. And if you total it all the attributes, yes, then we can analyze it to implement the object oriented approach is better, yes, for the requirement engineering, as that you can see the total for the object oriented approach is more as compared to the other approaches. Okay, and this data is collected by that author from some organization and the engineering students. Okay, so this all the approach is resolve the paradox of the requirement engineering, that need to formulate the clear vision of the system in the world of constantly changing requirement. Then all the approaches, as per our observations, that object oriented approach is better than the other approaches which is used reuse of the requirement, or may help for the scaling of the requirement, or integration of the requirement, or non-conflict requirement parameter. This is all about the approaches of the requirement engineering. And the conclusion of today's lecture, that we had discussed, or we have covered the topic, that what is requirement engineering, why requirement engineering is essential to study, what are the glimpses of the requirement engineering, and why what is the purpose of the requirement engineering, why to understood these concepts, yes. And by implementing this necessary skill set, or communicating this skill sets, uh, how we can develop, or how we can meet it the stakeholders need. This is all about the today's lecture. Thank you, thank you